The light at the end of the tunnel. This week is our last week of lessons, and next week you're going to be working on your final exam. So this week you're going to be learning about differentiated instruction that really puts together a lot of the other things we were learning. This is at the end of the class on purpose because it synthesizes many of the other concepts that we've been learning throughout the semester. And in the differentiated instruction is something, a way of planning that teachers can use, and they can use all of the different things that we've been learning about. On Thursday, I'm going to go over the final exam options and open them up for you so you could actually start your final exam on Thursday if you want. And you'll know exactly what's going to be on the exam. The exam is differentiated, so you'll learn more about differentiated instruction by seeing an example of how I've differentiated the final exam. So here's what we're looking at today. Why would a teacher want to differentiate? What is it to differentiate instruction? And how can we use differentiated instruction in planning lessons? So when I plan a lesson for you, I always start with what we call kudos. These are my objectives, and you might have noticed when I give you our learning objectives, I say, this is what I want you to know, this is what I want you to understand, and this is what I want you to be able to do. So sometimes there's just one of each thing, or I can mix them up, but that's what I'm looking for. When I go to plan a lesson, I always start with the learning objectives of what do I want you to know, understand, and be able to do by the end of the lesson. So by the end of this lesson, I want you to know what the key components of differentiated instruction are. I want you to know what differentiated instruction is and is not. And I want you to be aware of some different differentiated instruction strategies. And differentiated instruction is a complex concept, so I want you to be able to understand some things. I want you to understand that differentiation is a way of thinking and planning for teachers. And I want you to understand the value of beginning like this, beginning your planning with the objectives in mind. And this doesn't have to just be for lessons for teachers, but it could be for anything that you're planning with clients, with whoever that you're working with. It's always good to start with your specific learning objectives. What do you want happening by the end of the lesson? I want you to understand the importance of grouping flexibly so that you don't just target children and just put them into groups and keep them there. And the importance of equally respectful tasks for everyone. So some students don't just get a task that's kind of dumbed down, and everyone else gets a better task. And I want you to be able to evaluate a differentiated activity. So let's get started with why differentiate? Why do we need to? Let's just, and so differentiated instruction, I'm going to give you a couple of analogies here. It's kind of like baking a cake. You take your knowledge of educational strategies, like we learned about higher level thinking and creative thinking and types of thinking. We learned about cognitive development and behavior management strategies. We learned so many things all semester. So this is a way of taking those ingredients and what we know about learning and putting them together into the lesson. And we're going to see the cake. The lesson is like a cake, but those are your ingredients, the different things we know about learning and how it works. So the key ingredient is understanding this process of differentiated instruction. So that's like the flour of the cake, understanding that you're going to meet specific needs of students. Because we're not all the same, we're different. And so to treat all of your students as if they're the same is not respecting them. So you don't necessarily have to have a lesson. You're not going to have a lesson for each child, but you are going to honor their differences sometimes and give them options sometimes. So that's part of this understanding differentiation. And you're going to provide some complex learning, but when you do, you'll scaffold for higher level thinking. So maybe you'll give them some scaffolding, like to help them to pay attention with learning to learn skills and attention control. Maybe you'll do it through your questioning and asking good questions. Maybe you'll do it through types of thinking and honor those who are more literal of a thinker and those who are more creative and those more interpretive. So and looking at their learning styles. So scaffolding is when you're going to provide that help, that just-in-time help for students, because in a lesson, you're going to probably give them activities that may be complex. And there's where task analysis comes in that you did last week. Another key ingredient for differentiation is honoring students' differences, and it could be through any of these, not all of them, one or more of these. So maybe you're going to look through the lens of multiple intelligences and honor that some students really have preferences and they're more comfortable with some of the intelligences than others, and give them some opportunities, sometimes, not every time for every lesson, but sometimes give them an opportunity to use their strength area to demonstrate their knowledge. The same thing, you could do that with thinking styles, literal, interpretive, and creative, learning styles, you could do it with personality types, but just the idea that you recognize that your students are different and they learn differently, and that sometimes you're going to give them an opportunity to learn using their strengths. Another key ingredient for differentiation is flexible grouping. This means that you're going to use groups, but groups are going to change. And we change group based on maybe their readiness. Maybe some students are ready to learn something at a higher level than others. Maybe some students really need to review some things that are below grade level, and that would be readiness. Or I might group students based on their interests, and you could go into the group based on whatever you were interested in. Or learning profile, meaning your thinking style or your personality or any of those things. Okay, so, but the thing is that I'm not going to have groups and then keep the same groups the whole time. So one day I might group by readiness because it makes sense for what I'm teaching. And another great day, I might say, okay, we're going to today, I don't even tell the group, I don't tell the class, today I'm grouping by interests, today I'm grouping by readiness. I just do it in a different way, and students get mixed up, and no student then gets a feeling like I'm always in the low group, because that's one of the disadvantage of tracking students, and that's grouping students by low, medium, and high, and always keeping them in the same group. That is not what differentiation is. Differentiation is flexible grouping depending on the activity and how the teacher decides to group the students. So another key ingredient for differentiation is to include both formative and summative assessment. Formative assessment is done either before or during instruction. When you're looking at a ed puzzle video for me, that is formative assessment. I don't count it for a grade. You get a grade for doing it, but I don't count off if you miss a question, because in the ed puzzle, if you answer a question, you get it wrong, it tells you the right answer right away. So you're in the learning mode. That's formative assessment. I'm checking for your understanding and helping you understand what you know, what you don't know, what you still need to learn. This informs instruction for you and for me. So I also can see, here's what the class knows, doesn't know. This is what I need to review. That happens before and during instruction, where I'm constantly taking the temperature of the class, finding out what you know and don't know, and letting you know what you know and don't know, so that we can do a better job with learning. So this is during the learning process. After instruction, I will use summative assessment, and that's when you take your quizzes. That's summative assessment, and that's for a grade. Okay, you get a grade, but your quizzes are still kind of formative assessment because they're leading up to the big summative, which is your final. So in your quizzes, I give you a second chance to redo your quiz and learn from your mistake. so that in summative assessment, when you take the final, that you will have learned what you got wrong before and use that in your summative assessment. So this is for a grade. The summative assessment purpose is to see whether you do know the things that I said I want you to know, whether you understand the things I wanted you to understand, and whether you can do the things I wanted you to be able to do. That would be summative. Like your task analysis, when you completed that, that was a summative assessment. We talked about it, we practiced, and then you completed a task analysis, and that was a summative assessment for your task analysis process. Another key ingredient, important part of differentiated instruction is to have a well-designed unit, a well-planned unit. Before I go to differentiate something, it needs to be well-planned in the first place. If I take a junky lesson that's not well-planned and I go to differentiate, it's still going to be a junky lesson. So you really need to plan well before you even think about the differentiated components. And that is one way you can do that is through backward design. Now I could do a whole course just on backward design. So this is just the tip of the iceberg and letting you know how you can plan a really good unit. And hopefully, if you're going to be a teacher, you learn more about this in some of your subsequent classes. But you start, it's backward design. You start with the end in mind. You start with identifying the desired results. That's the kudos. What do you want students to know, understand, be able to do? So that's kind of like the target. This is where we're going at the end. Then you determine, then this is where you do your summative assessments. And you determine, how do I know if students are going to know, understand, be able to do that? I'm going to determine my summative assessment. Then after I know how I'm going to assess you, then I plan learning experiences that match what I want you to know, understand, be able to do, and how I'm going to assess you. Those learning events, I don't plan until after. When I was a beginning teacher, actually the first 15 years of teaching, I always started by planning first because I loved the planning stage, and I would just start planning things. And then I would get to the part where I have to make up a test, and I make up a test based on what I planned. But I didn't really have the goals fresh in my mind, like very clear. So it was harder to do because I was all over the place with my planning. It took me a long time to plan. When I learned this, it was like a big revelation for me, and it helped me plan and be more productive from then on in my career, to realize that if I do that in these steps, it's easier and more targeted and more effective. So again, the first step is to identify the desired results. What is it I want students to know, understand, and be able to do? And those are, we call them the kudos: know, understand, be able to do. Then determine acceptable assessments. How will I know they know this? How will I know if they're able to do what I want them to do? And this should match this. Okay, the acceptable evidence should match the desired results. Right? And then we plan the learning experiences. And these learning experiences should lead to success on the final exam. That is why I don't want you to be worrying about the final exam, because everything I've done all semester was on purpose, leading for you to be successful on that final exam. I'm confident you're going to do well on this final exam. Okay, then there's other things you can add into the lesson. So if you know about cooperative learning and want to use cooperative learning in your lesson, you could do that. If you are a reading specialist, or you know a reading specialist, or you know a lot about reading strategies, you can use reading strategies to differentiate instruction. If you know how to include technology in the lesson and use technology to enhance that, then you can use technology. When I was a technology integrator, I worked with teachers and students, but I worked with teachers to plan. And the first thing I did before we planned what technology we were going to use is to sit down and say, what do we want students to know, understand, and be able to do? And then when we looked at that, if technology would help us with that, we would use technology. Or if it would be just as easy to just use paper and pencil, then I would say, hey, let's use paper and pencil for that. Let's save the technology for when the technology is actually going to help with what we want students to know, understand, and be able to do. So you see that all these things kind of fit together. So why do we need differentiated instruction? Well, because students aren't all the same. And we have our standards now. So standards, came into play. When they came into play, we want all students at one grade level to be able to reach the grade level standards or exceed the grade level standards. We want to give all students an opportunity to do that. So we want to give them learning opportunities that help them get to those standards. Some students come to us already almost meeting those standards, and we want them to learn too. So we want them to exceed the standards, and we want them to get opportunities to be able to exceed the standards so they don't stay stagnant. But all students, even the students that come to us below grade level, we want to give them the best chance to reach the standards. So we want to provide them with learning opportunities that may differ for them than other students so that they can get to those standards. So that's why we would differentiate instruction. Because students are different, we want to equalize the learning opportunities so that everyone has a chance to work towards the learning standards for that grade level. So I'm going to ask you a question now. Another analogy. What do shoes have to do with learning? So I'm going to let's just do this one in the chat, okay? So this is totally an analogy, and I'm not asking for right answers. Just what kind of connections can you make with wearing shoes and learning? So put something in the chat. What do you think? All right, I'm going to pick a few of them. All right, so Christina says, everyone learns how to tie their laces at different times. Good. That's a good example. So sometimes we learn at different times and we don't all learn. Just because you're 5 doesn't mean you are all learning the same thing at the same time. Just because you're 11 doesn't mean all 11-year-olds know the same things. Good. We grow out of shoes and sometimes need new ones. Yes, so we need to learn new things. Everyone needs to learn new things. And Maddie says they fit different and they have different uses. Absolutely. So we have different shoes for different uses. We have different learning strategies that fit differently, and different people can wear different shoes. So you might feel comfortable in sneakers. Someone else might feel comfortable in sandals. Someone else might want to wear heels. So the thing is, we have difference. So that kind of ties in with our different learning styles. Not all shoes are the same style. Everyone likes different kinds. Let's see. There's different sizes. So, oops, let me go back. So I wear a size 8.5. What if I came in as a teacher and said, I wear a size 8.5. When you're in my classroom, everybody has to wear a size 8.5 shoe. That's an analogy for a teacher saying, this is the way I'm learning, and this is the way I teach, and this is the way learning is going to happen in my classroom. Too bad if you're a different learner than me. That would be how this analogy would play out. So the whole idea is that we are different learners, and we wear different shoes at different times, and we learn different things. We learn to run, we learn to tie our shoes at different paces. And because we are all different and it's a different place in learning, sometimes we need to learn something in a different way than the person sitting next to us. Okay? We learned about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. And think about this, and you're looking at different zones. Are students in any one class all in one zone at the same time? In the zone of proximal development, optimal learning takes place when learning is about 15 to 20% too hard for you to do alone. And anyone in that learning environment can stand up and be the expert and help other people learn. So we're learning together as a group. Things are maybe complex and we need each other. But you can see that in any one, when you did the animation, and some of you had previous experience in doing some coding, you were at a different learning level than those who had never coded before. Some of you were afraid of coding. You were at a different level and you needed something different from those who felt comfortable with coding. And by helping each other and providing scaffolding, we could provide this zone of proximal development so that not everyone has to do the same thing at the same time. The scaffolding was available for you to watch videos. I could help you individually. You could help each other. So not everyone needed the same thing. It was differentiated in that way. So instruction that fits. Differentiation is instruction that fits. So we look at three things when we're looking at fitting instruction to the learners who are different. We can change the readiness, which is like size of the shoes, to fit the student so that it's just right. The learning is just right for their readiness, whatever they're ready to learn. We can change what the instruction based on interests, and this would be kind of like the style we talked about. You might like one style over another. And we could also change instruction based on learning profile or comfort. And this is, if you're more comfortable wearing sneakers or slippers or whatever you're comfortable wearing, that's like your learning profile. So these are three of the important components of differentiated instruction. That this is how we changed. This is how students are different. Okay, students are different in their readiness. They're different. They have different interests and they have different learning profiles. So this is why we differentiate. And we can consider any one, two, or three of these when we're differentiating instruction. So what is it when we say what is differentiated instruction? It basically is differing the strategies and tasks based on student learning needs. So considering your students in the class or whoever it is that you're teaching or coaching or working with, and saying, what do they need? And differing what you're doing with them to match their needs so that we're not going to just treat everyone the same because not everyone is the same. So we can differentiate. Remember, I mentioned the three are the components are readiness, interests, and learning profile. So it's based on these differences that we can change these things. I could change the content or the process or the product. So the content is what they're learning. Okay. Now, if I'm teaching everyone a certain thing, like if I'm teaching all of you about differentiated instruction, I'm not going to change the content while I'm teaching you because everyone needs to know that. I might change the process, which is how you learn it. Maybe you're going to learn it by reading, or you're going to learn it by watching a video, or you're going to learn it by talking to each other and going through a problem-solving process. This is the process of how you learn it, how you process the information. Or I could change the product, and this is when I'm asking you to demonstrate your understanding. I could say, make a video, answer some questions, write a song, write a poem, whatever. So these are the different ways I can differentiate how you're learning or how you're demonstrating your understanding or what you're learning. And the reason I would change one or more of these is because of your differences in this way. Now, our final exam is going to be differentiated in many different ways. And one is by content. So, for example, in the half of your exam is going to have all different content, and you're going to get to choose which content you're most comfortable with, which content you're most interested in. So readiness would be what you're comfortable with, knowing that you know this content really well, like maybe multiple intelligences, you really understood that and loved that. That was your interest, but maybe you know a lot about it. Or maybe based on your learning profile and what you feel comfortable with something that's more literal or interpretive or creative. You're going to have choices, and you might choose something that's literal or interpretive and creative based on what you're comfortable with, and what you're interested in and what you're ready for. So there's going to be different choices for you, different content that you can choose. Now, the process, I'm not differentiating because you already learned these things. So I'm not differentiating how you learn it, but I am differentiating by product as well. You're going to choose your content and you're going to choose your product. So I give you many choices. It might be a short answer kind of questions that you want to answer, or maybe you're going to make a poem or a song, or you're going to do a compare and contrast or something. So you're going to have a lot of choices of products and a lot of choices of content, and they're all based on what you're comfortable with, what you know, what your interests are, and what your learning profile is. So this is a really complex differentiated thing by doing this with the exam, but we can do it in just simple ways with little lessons. It doesn't have to be as complex as this. So I might change the content based on readiness. So for example, if I were teaching some students about adding, say I'm teaching first graders about adding, and some students already kind of know how to add, and some students are just learning how to add, I might put my students in groups based on what they know, based on their readiness. And those students who already know how to add, say, single-digit numbers, I might start giving them some double-digit numbers to add. Whereas those with single-digit numbers, maybe we'll work with manipulatives, or you'll do something with them to help them with those single-digit numbers. So see, both groups, when you're doing differentiated instruction, you don't have to have 10 groups. It could just be 2 or 3 groups. But based on some students who are just not ready to learn that, or they're just ready to learn that, and some students who already know what I'm about to teach, I could give them a different activity based on readiness. Or I could choose something based on interest. So I could change a product of how they're going to demonstrate this. And I can say, okay, we're learning about, I don't know, we're learning about density or something. Say it's science and we're learning about density. So I want you to demonstrate your understanding of density. And I might say, I'm going to change it based on interest. So someone might be looking at density in the context of, say, nature, while someone else is looking at food, and someone else is looking at it. So you can see, based on your interests, you're looking at the same concept, but based on different things. And that could be based on interests. Or I can say, a product based on learning profiles. So someone's going to make a creative product, and someone is going to do a compare and contrast, which would be more interpretive thinking, or someone's going to answer specific literal questions. That would be learning profile. So we're going to now practice this a little bit and see if you can use your creative thinking to do this. And because this activity, I'm going to put you into groups based on your interests. So I'm going to open up 4 breakout rooms. And in those breakout rooms, you're going to talk about whatever your topic is. So this is going to be breakout room 1. Whoops. Let me go back to that, and I'll put breakout room 1 here so you can see. This is room 1. This is going to be room 2. This is going to be room 3. And this is going to be room 4. Okay, so here's the scenario here. You are a 3rd grade reading teacher teaching a reading lesson, and the lesson is all about friendship. So what you want students to know, understand, and be able to do is about being a good friend, okay, and being kind to others and all of that. So that's your learning goal, to be a good friend, but it's in a reading class. So how are you going to differentiate? You're going to talk to each other in your group and say, are we going to change the content, the process of how they learn about friendship, the product of what they're going to do to show us they know about friendship, or the content would be them reading something different from other people. So some might be reading one book while others are reading another book, but everything has to be about friendship because the lesson is friendship, okay? Or in group 2, it's a 7th grade math lesson about fractions. Okay, so think about your group and what are you going to differentiate by? Is it going to be content, process, or product? Those are the things they're going to show, and it's going to be based on either readiness, interest, or learning profile. There isn't just one right answer to this. This is you using your creative thinking with your group to come up with ideas for how you could do this. Group 3 is going to be talking about 10th grade social studies, where students are learning about the Civil War. So are you going to change the process of how they learn about the Civil War? Are you going to change the content of which parts of the Civil War they're learning about, or the product of how they're going to show you they know about the Civil War? And then for 1st grade science, the students are learning about floating and sinking. So they need to understand what makes something float, what makes something sink, and how are they going to learn it? All right, so think about which one you want to do. And let's just put, while I'm making the breakout rooms, would you put in the chat, which one is your preference, just so that we don't have someone alone in a group? I want to make sure that everyone has a group to go to. Okay, it looks like we have 2, 3. Okay, so looking at that, I see 2 3s, a couple 4s, some 1s, some 2s. Okay, so it looks like we're okay. We have at least 2 people in each group. I'm going to open up the groups. I'll put this one. You can see, you can go on here, but I'll keep this up so you see this is what you're going to differentiate by, although you're going to be in your own rooms. So this is slide number 22 and 23. So those are the 2 slides you're going to look at in your group. If you're in this differentiated instruction in week 13, this is the presentations, and it's the first one here that we're in. And we're on slide 22 and 23. Raise your hand in your group if you need me to come in. I'm going to let you talk for about 10 minutes and then see if you need more time. So off you go. Back. So let's start with group 1. You talked about 3rd grade reading lesson, friendship. You can tell me one idea or more than one idea if you came up with more. Is there a spokesperson for the group, or should I call in someone? I'll give first an opportunity for someone to speak up and volunteer.
I can do it. So we talked about splitting them into groups based on like reading level and then giving them different like articles or books or whatever it is based on friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also talked about making each book or article kind of about like a different like topic within friendship and then having them kind of like work as a group to like summarize it and then share it with the class. That way, like the whole class gets like every idea, but they're still reading something that's like appropriate for their skill level.
I love that. I love it because look at you're differentiating the content. Even though they're all about friendship, they're learning about different kinds of friendship or different kind of scenarios, and you're differentiating the content by readiness because they're in different groups based on so they can read at their reading level, which makes total sense when you're in a reading group. You want to be able to read what you're given. So I love this and you're also looking at different interests, and that everybody does get the same thing. And what I like about this is in differentiated instruction, part of the time they're in separate groups, but a lot of the lesson they're together is a whole group. And you just demonstrated that. They come back and they talk about it as a whole group. So differentiation is just part of the lesson, not the whole lesson. It's just either the activity you're doing or maybe the product at the end of the activity or something. So I love that. Thank you. Anyone else from the group want to add anything? Haley did a great job. Okay, let's listen to room 2 now. Emma, Gia, and Natalia, who wants to talk to us about what you came up with for 7th grade math?
Yeah, so in our group, we talked about modifying the process. So for kids who are like more interested in like something like sports, we could have them focus on like a topic with like wins versus losses and like
Oh,
make fractions in that type of way. Or we could have a group talking about like pizza slices, like dividing it up that way, like based on
uh-huh.
interest. One way
Okay,
to modify the product, we were talking about like dividing, like introducing like drawing different fractions or
okay,
like messing around with like physical objects like Play-Doh or like blocks that they could like
okay.
divide into fractions. But yeah.
I'm so proud of you. I can't believe I just did this real short little introduction, and these two groups have come up with as good or better ideas than teachers I've worked with for years. Thank you. So yes, you're looking at, changing the product. I like you talked about manipulating versus drawing, and that really is kind of process too. And then also you talked about, the different interests, looking at different interests, food versus sports. So you're looking at interests, and you're also looking at content there because the food, well, no, content is the same because everyone's learning fractions, but you are changing based on interests, what they're learning, what the topic is. But everyone's learning about fractions. So congratulations, that was awesome. Thank you. Let's look at Peter and Bosco in room 3. Tell us about your ideas for differentiating a social studies lesson.
All right. We said that because social studies is more of like a rigid topic, like you're just memorizing the facts, we
Mhm,
didn't want to change up the content too much,
mhm,
but like the way that it would be presented. Rather than just slides on a PowerPoint, you could incorporate all different kinds of online interactive things like Kahoot or like quizzes.
mm.
Um, we said that you could put students into groups to make sure that the work is being fully understood so that they can help each other understand and memorize the facts, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Oh, I like that. So now here's the little tweak. When you put the students into the group, the thing with the difference between putting kids into groups and differentiate instruction is that you group them on purpose because of readiness, interest, or learning profile. So the only tweak I would do, I love the ideas you have. The only tweak I would do is when you put into groups, you would either let them choose a group based on something. The groups need to be doing different things. If they're all doing the same thing, then it's not differentiated. So differentiated instruction is when you group students because they're different. So take your ideas and let's combine them and say, there's interactive things you can do online. There's some things you can do, maybe watch some videos. There's different things you could have. Maybe you could have students choose how they're going to process the information by doing this game or doing this. Um, or maybe they're going to create their own Kahoot. You could differentiate product and say, you're going to create a Kahoot for others. That's one group. Another group you might say, you can make a little video, or someone else can. So take what you're doing and just some of those students would be in different, the groups would be doing different things. I guess that's my point. And that's
Okay.
what differentiated instruction is, that not everyone is doing the same thing at the same time. Now, what you originally talked about was good learning and good planning because you were honoring differences in that you were saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. So students would be engaged with their different learning styles. But the one tweak is just in the groups, you have to be intentional, putting them into groups based on either interests or learning profile or readiness. Okay?
That makes sense.
Yeah. But Good, good. I'm proud of you. That's really good thinking. Let's look at group 4 and listen to what they have to say. First grade science, floating and sinking. Who would like to tell us about your ideas? We have Paige, Iba, Jada, and Justin. Is someone going to volunteer? Do I need to call on someone?
So we were talking about how we could change like either the content or the process. They kind of go hand in hand based off of interests. Instead of like just teaching it and based on like a PowerPoint or some kind of lecture, we could do a demonstration with different objects and they could kind of predict which ones they think are going to float and sink. And then we could do the demonstration and see what they think afterwards and explain like why certain things float and certain things sink.
Okay. All right. So that is a great activity. Now, tell me how it's differentiated. Is it differentiated by learning, by readiness, interest, or learning profile?
We were going to say that it was done by interest because we thought that maybe the kids would enjoy that more than just sitting there listening to different like the teacher talk about it, or we could
Yeah.
put it in groups and one group could listen to the teacher talk if they enjoyed that more, and then one group could do the demonstration.
Okay. All right. Oh, I love this idea because this is great to talk about. So now, based on interests, what you might do is you might have all kids doing the demonstration of floating or sinking, but you could do it by interest based on the objects that they're going to put in the water. So you could have 2 or 3 different stations, and some of the objects could be things that they're interested in. So let's say one could be toys, one could be food, one could be, so you could do something different so they could be based on interest. So they're all doing sinking and floating, but because the things they're putting in the water are different, that would be based on interest. You see what I mean?
Yeah, that sounds better.
Yeah. So now the one thing that this is, I'm so glad you said that because this gets me to another point I want to make, and that is everyone has to have equal respect to every task. So if you say you kids are going to go over here and you're going to read about soaking and sinking and floating, and you kids get to go over there and actually put your put stuff in the water and play with it. You see, that it might not be looked at as equally respectful because the kids who have to read, even though they're good readers, they might resent it. They're in first grade. They want to go play with the water. You see what I mean? So you might say some kids, if you're going to do it by readiness, you could say some kids are going to read about sinking and floating, and others are going to maybe watch a video, and then they're going to get into groups based on interests. So maybe the kids who don't know how to read, they're going to watch a video. Or maybe the kids who know how to read are going to read to the kids who don't know how to read. You're going to put them in groups, and then you're going to do floating and sinking and based on what they choose to put in the water. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's just it's this whole process. I think it's fun talking to other people and talking to other teachers and saying, okay, how are we going to do this? But if someone were to come in, if you were going to tell, say, your principal that you were differentiated instruction, the one thing that has to happen is there has to be part of the lesson where kids are in groups on purpose, not randomly. They're in groups on purpose because they have different readiness or interests or learning profile. That has to happen. Otherwise, it's not differentiated instruction. It's just working in groups. And it could still be good instruction. You could have good ideas, but it's only differentiated instruction if sometimes kids are in groups based on their differences. Okay. Thank you so much for all of your ideas and your thinking. I think that really helped solidify rather than me just say to you, here is what these is for you to go into your groups. I put you in groups based on your interests. You saw that. And you came up with really good ideas. So thank you. Let's do this now. I want to talk about what differentiation is and is not, because it is misunderstood by many different educators and, believe this or not, administrators who will misunderstand differentiated instruction and say things like, okay, differentiation is cool. I want all of you to differentiate every lesson every day. Well, no, that's not going to work. Differentiation takes a lot of planning, and no, you can't, you're not going to differentiate every lesson every day. It's something that you're going to do sometimes. And if you're just learning it, you'll start out doing it maybe once per unit and then add to it every year so that you'll have more lessons that are differentiated. But you are not going to differentiate every lesson every day. Otherwise, you will have no life. Okay, so you have to understand what it is, that it takes a lot of planning and it is a way of planning. So differentiation is student focused. You're thinking about the students and their needs. That's what it is. It's not individualized instruction. Yes, all students are different, but you're not going to have a different lesson plan for every student. You could just have 2 groups, maybe 3 groups, but you're not going to have a different lesson plan for every student, which is kind of like this IEPs for all. It's not that. Okay. Differentiation is teaching up. It is not teaching down. It's not dumbing down. So some people say, oh, differentiated instruction, you're dumbing down the curriculum for some students. So here's the standards. I'm going to dumb down the standards for these kids because I don't think they can reach the standards. That is not what differentiated instruction is. What you're doing is you're looking at the standards and you're providing scaffolding for the students that are going to struggle to get to the standards. You're teaching up to the standards. You're not taking the standards and dumbing them down. And differentiated instruction is flexible grouping. It is not the bluebirds, buzzards, and wombats. That was in my time. When I was going to school, we had ability grouping. You were in a certain group. You were in the top, medium, or low group in reading and math or whatever. Everyone knew these are the students, these are the kids that are in the low group. No matter what you called it, they knew they were in their low group. They felt dumb. That wasn't good for their learning. So it is not that. It is flexible grouping where sometimes students are going to be in groups based on their readiness because that's what they need at that time. But other times they're going to be in groups with other students and they're going to be based on their interests or their learning profile. That's what differentiation is and what it's not. And differentiation isn't giving something extra to some students. So if you finish your work, then you get to do more work. That's not differentiation, okay? This says it's not incompatible with standards. You use the standards to create what you want students to know, understand, and be able to do, and you plan your lessons all based on that, okay? And then it's not just for gifted students, it's for all students. All right, now we are going to learn from the best. This is Carol Ann Tomlinson. She is the #1 guru in the country for differentiated instruction. I had the pleasure of going to Virginia for 2 weeks and learning from the best. So now you're going to meet her. I'm going to go to live mode here. And if you go to week 13 and click on what is differentiated instruction, and open that up, we are going to hear it right from the horse's mouth from Carol Ann Tomlinson. You might even hear some of the words you heard me say because she trained me on what differentiated instruction is, but you'll hear it from her. So let's have everyone join me. So since you missed class, please go and watch the What is Differentiated Instruction video. You'll get to meet Carol Ann Tomlinson, who is the #1 guru for differentiated instruction. So hear it right from the horse's mouth what differentiated instruction is. And then you're going to step into a differentiated classroom and see differentiated instruction in action. And that is through the station rotation video. So please watch that video along with the Carol Ann Tomlinson video before class on Thursday, because on Thursday, we're going to open up with a quiz activity to check your understanding of what differentiated instruction is. And we're also going to learn on Thursday how some different teaching strategies that teachers can use to plan differentiated lessons. So have a good day, and I'll see you Thursday morning.